So as you might have just heard, this webinar is being recorded, and I will share further details regarding that shortly. I am going to go ahead and share my screen just to run over a few housekeeping items. We are at noon, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. We have an incredible registrant number for this webinar. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I predict it will be very informative. Many thanks to Denny and Jim for joining us, and Scott from Pennsylvania. I'm going to hand it over to Scott shortly, but I just wanted to cover a few logistical items. So this webinar is certified for CM credit. You can find the number here, and I will also be sharing that in the chat box momentarily. So we really do encourage questions. Our speakers will be prompting you to drop questions in the chat box, which is a little bit different from some of our previous webinars, but this is just a more informal conversation with open-ended questions. But for the more formal questions that you would like our speakers to answer in the Q&A portion, please submit your questions using the Q&A box to help Scott keep track of all inquiries. And then during some of the more engaging components of the webinar, in which our speakers will be asking for those open-ended questions, you may use the raise hand feature to request to be unmuted if you would like to answer orally, participate orally, and that also applies for the Q&A portion at the end. I will be putting in helpful links to the YouTube where this webinar recording will be posted in a few days, and links to our website in the chat box shortly as well. Feel free to private DM me using the chat feature if you have any logistical concerns. admin@APA-Virginia is also a helpful email if you have any questions after this webinar. We will be having a follow-up e-blast going out to all attendees with the contact information to our speakers if you have any questions that you don't get to today, or just need any other further resources. That email will be going out, which will include the link to the presentation recording and the slide deck as well. But otherwise, APA Virginia is really happy to help in hosting this for the Mid-Atlantic Planning Collaboration. And at this point, I will turn it over to Scott.
All right, great. Thanks, Jillian. My name is Scott Duncanson. I'm a senior environmental planner and project manager with Gannett Fleming and a member of the Pennsylvania chapter's Professional Development Committee. On behalf of the Pennsylvania chapter of APA, who is hosting the webinar, I want to welcome you to the latest installment of the Mid-Atlantic Planning Collaboration's webinar series. For those of you not familiar with the Mid-Atlantic Planning Collaboration, it's comprised of 7 APA chapters along with 5 other related planning organizations across the Mid-Atlantic region, ranging from as far north as Pennsylvania to as far south as North Carolina. The Mid-Atlantic Planning Collaboration was formed during the pandemic to help bring planners together across geographical borders who might be dealing with similar issues, and to provide free professional development opportunities for planners across the Mid-Atlantic region. A few announcements from both Mid-Atlantic Planning Collaboration and the PA chapter of APA. The next scheduled Mid-Atlantic Planning webinar, I believe, is going to be in January 2024, when we kick off a webinar series on resiliency. So stay tuned for more details on that resiliency series that kicks off in January. The APA chapter, the Pennsylvania chapter of APA, has its own monthly webinar series titled Webinar Wednesdays, held the first Wednesday of each month. And our next webinar will be on ethics cases of the year for 2023. And that's going to be on Wednesday, November 1st at noon. So anyone who still needs that ethics credit for this round of the AICP-CM, feel free to jump onto that and look for information on the PA chapter website. We're also planning a December webinar to target the law CM. So try to hit a few of those required CMs with webinars at the end of the year. For anybody looking for more CM opportunities, the Pennsylvania Chapter's annual conference is going to be held Sunday, October 15th through Tuesday, October 17th in beautiful downtown Scranton, PA, home of the current or birthplace of the current sitting president. We'll have over 40 classroom sessions, mobile workshops. You can get up to 12 CMs with the various specialty CMs that you need: ethics, law, resilience, and equity. The last day to register for that conference is tomorrow. So again, go to the PA chapter website to get that information. One disclaimer, the Pennsylvania chapter of APA, along with the Mid-Atlantic Planning Collaboration, is not responsible for the materials or opinions of the speakers you're about to hear. What would be a webinar without a disclaimer? With that, we've got a great session lined up for you today, titled Off the Shelf and Into Action: How to Create an Implementable Comprehensive Plan. And just like the Philadelphia Phillies did last night, I'm sure our presenters are going to hit it out of the park today. Off the Shelf and Into Action is also the title of a book on the same topic, authored by our speakers. Please note that the proceeds from that book go to the PA chapter of APA's Student Scholarship Fund. So if anyone is interested in purchasing the book, you're not lining Denny and Jim's pockets. The money is going to the PA chapter's Student Scholarship Fund. With that, I'll introduce our two talented speakers. Denny Pucco is a self-employed consultant in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He worked 15 years at the PA Department of Economic Development, Community and Economic Development, assisting local planners. He worked 27 years in Pennsylvania County planning, most notably as the executive director at Mercer County. Denny's expertise includes comprehensive plans, land use ordinances, strategic planning, and planning training. He taught a planning course at Thiel College, and he is the co-author of Off the Shelf and Into Action: How to Create Implementable Comprehensive Plan. Denny has a bachelor's degree in planning from Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and in 2021, he received the Distinguished Service Award from the Pennsylvania chapter of APA. Quick sidebar, I digress a little bit. Indiana, Pennsylvania, besides the university, if anybody can throw in the chat here, what is Indiana, Pennsylvania best known for? We'll see if we get any responses there, see if we have any winners. Okay, and our second speaker is Jim Pashik. He's the founding partner of Pashik Plus MTR, a planning and landscape architecture firm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Maybe you guys wouldn't like my Phillies reference there earlier. Sorry about that. Oh, and Megan, you have the correct answer. The birthplace of Jimmy Stewart. Very good. Jim has extensive experience in comprehensive plans and in the implementable plan approach. Under Jim's leadership, Pashik Plus MTR has received numerous honors and awards for comprehensive plans. Jim himself received the 2015 Leadership Professional Planner Award from the Pennsylvania chapter of APA. He obtained a Bachelor of Science degree in landscape architecture from Penn State University and a Master's of Business Administration from the University of Pittsburgh. So working in Pennsylvania, he's got most of his bases covered. There's still time to get a PhD at Penn or Temple, and then you've got East, Central, and Western Pennsylvania covered. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Denny, who's going to start our webinar.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott, and thank you, Jillian, too. We're very appreciative to have the opportunity to talk about the Implementable Comprehensive Plan. Both Jim and I have shared frustrations about planning that probably a lot of you have too, and we've put a lot of effort and passion into thinking differently about planning in order to try to make it better. And we want to share some of that with you today. Allow me a moment. I'm going to bring up our program on the screen. Oh, pardon me. There's always a little bit of a hiccup. Pardon me. I thought I was set with. the presentation at the right spot. I see here. All right, let me try that again. Again, my apologies. Anybody provide me a cue that we're up with the front slide correctly? Thank you, Jim.
Looks good.
Okay. Again, we appreciate the chance to talk about the passion that Jim and I share about this approach that we call the Implementable Comprehensive Plan. As Scott noted, we're also proud and pleased to note that we've written the book. And as Scott said, we're proud and pleased to say that the proceeds from the book are going to our chapter, our APA chapter in Pennsylvania, for scholarships in education. We put the book up there because in the event there is interest on anybody's part to find more about the things that we're going to talk about today, because we're going to be able to talk about the surface of a lot of the things that we've worked on, and there'll be more information in the book about how we're trying to encourage different thinking, our 5 keys to an implementable plan, the case studies that we've looked at. There's information here. Even those of you that are smart enough to pull the QR code with your phone, that's on the screen for a minute. It'll be actually back on the screen again later on in the program. So a little bit about who we are and how we got here. I'll start with my story. I've been in planning and county planning. I spent 27 years, as Scott mentioned, most of it in Mercer County in Northwest Pennsylvania. At Mercer County, we had a rather unique joint county municipal planning commission. We wrote, and I use the word wrote with emphasis, a lot of comprehensive plans for member municipalities. I think in the early days that I was there at Mercer County, we really didn't appreciate the practicality of them, the degree to which they got implemented or not. The last 15 years of my full-time career, I spent with the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development, providing assistance to local governments in Pennsylvania. At PADCED, there was a 7-year period of unprecedented investments in community planning. We averaged over $2 million, sometimes as high as $4 million a year in grants to local governments to help them do planning. And after the time had passed, our team of planners, DCED had a team of 6 planners in those days. We evaluated the results. There were many good plans produced, but there were too many plans that weren't making an impact. They weren't being implemented, and a surprising number of them not even adopted. And we asked why. And as we investigated further, we discovered that there indeed are differences in the content of the plan, the process that was followed, the people and the groups that were involved, between plans that got implemented and those that didn't. After the 2007 and 2008 recession brought budget cuts and reduced almost to next to nothing what we offered in a funding program, and cut our staff to the point that I was the only planner left at DCED, I started pitching this notion of an implementable comprehensive plan around Pennsylvania. We started approaching it, pitching it as a distinct approach to planning. And I pitched it particularly in those days with the consultants. Probably not just in Pennsylvania, but certainly in Pennsylvania, consultants lead planning. Municipalities hire them. When they get grants, they hire the consultants, and the consultants are in a leadership position. So I pitched it particularly to consultants, and that led to an association with Jim.
So Scott was kind enough to give you the short term in terms of my experience, but I just want to touch on a couple things in my background that I think are relevant to the implementable planning process. One, I'm a visual thinker, and that's probably why I ended up in landscape architecture, is because I was very much interested in communicating visually. And I think that is what probably led me to being interested in more and better ways of communicating ideas through interesting visual ways. The other is that my personality is such that I'm probably a quiet nerd if someone were to, but what I'm proudest of is that I'm a listener. And I think it takes a listener to really engage the community in a way that's useful. And it takes a planner who is willing to listen to understand, really understand what the issues are in the community. And I just happen to have that kind of quiet interest in listening that I think enabled a robust public engagement process in plans long before the implementable comprehensive planning process. But certainly it queued me up to be someone very open to the ideas of having a real strong public engagement process. And we'll touch on some of that as we go through the slides. The story I have in the book is that my wife and I were driving down the turnpike to go to New York City, to go to museums. And somewhere near Harrisburg, after listening to my wife talk about the challenges she had with her job and career, she asked me a question. She knew that we had just won another award for outstanding comprehensive plan in the state of Pennsylvania. And so she said, well, tell me. She said, that's really cool that you guys won an award for comprehensive planning. She said, tell me how your plans change the community for the better. There was a long silence on that road from Harrisburg on as I tried to figure out how to answer that question. I could talk about the public engagement processes that I was very proud of. I could talk about our thorough nature of doing comprehensive plans, 40 pages of census stuff, dozens of pages of maps. But what I couldn't say was that our plans made a difference. And it got me thinking. It got me thinking that surely there must be a better way to plan, and surely there must be a better way to have the plan become part of a process to make a difference in the community. And so that's how I started to think about these things and was so receptive to some of Betty's ideas about better ways of planning.
So really, we're just a couple of average planners, okay? Sometimes I think people that write books, they must be really smart experts. We're a couple of average planners. We shared a frustration. We reached out to others. We tried things. We learned. We decided to write a book to tell what we heard, tried, and learned so that it would encourage others to do the same and maybe create plans that are more meaningful. We don't purport to have all the answers, but we do want to add to the conversation about better ways to do planning. I think that's what we call it, a conversation. That's how we frame our book. It's a conversation. And again, it's not the experts telling you what's the writer best thing to do. It's a conversation. If there's one big thought that we would leave with this presentation, it's that if you want to have an implementable comprehensive plan, you've just got to think differently. And you've got to apply that objective of having an implementable plan at every step of the process, from the kickoff meeting through the public engagement, through work sessions, through the design and layout of the document. You've got to say, what will it take? What will we put in here? Who will we involve that will make a difference in this plan getting implemented versus sitting on the shelf? I think a couple of other quick notes before we get into more of the meat of the program is we're really pleased to say that the implementable planning approach has become a bit of a movement in Pennsylvania. And a number of planners have said to us they feel freed from the shackles of template planning. And these days, if you pick up an RFP that's been issued for a comprehensive plan by a Pennsylvania municipality, I think probably 9 out of 10 of them are going to say they want an implementable plan. It's really caught on. The planning work we're going to talk about today is focused in Pennsylvania because that's where our practice is. And it involves smaller towns which face more challenges in implementable planning than maybe some of the larger ones do because of limitations of capacity. But the ideas that we're going to talk about are applicable anywhere we believe in any size town. Hey, here's our first starter slide, and it begins with, I guess, a series of questions. We have heard, actually, I saw it written in an application, the plan wasn't implemented. Okay, the plan wasn't implemented. So we thought about it from a grade standpoint, Jim and I, and our question to you is, what grade do you give for the implementation of your municipality's plan? I guess we'll ask that, those of you that are a planner for a municipality, those of you that maybe work for a consulting firm or for some other agency, maybe think of it in terms of a plan that you were recently involved in. But please enter into the chat what grade you would give A, B, C, D, or F for the degree to which your comprehensive plan has been implemented. Jim, if you might help me out here, I'm not, and if anybody has the chat open, in my view.
Couple B's and a couple C's.
Any more responses coming in?
A few more B's and a C. I'd say planners in the southern part of this region are doing a better job than those in Pennsylvania.
Okay, no D's or F's yet.
No.
Wow, that's great. So that's good. That's a good response. And I think maybe certainly not just in PA where we think we've had a movement, but nationally too. I think there's been a lot more attention to practical results from planning as we've grown, as the years have passed by. So the question we have next to you, and again, enter your answers into the chat. Why aren't plans implemented? Those that you maybe that only gave your plan a C, why a C and not an A? Or those of you that, again, have an experience with plans that haven't been implemented and maybe weren't wanting to share that. Why aren't comprehensive plans implemented? And enter that into the chat, your thoughts about why.
So the first one I see, Denny, is political issues.
Okay.
Or lack of funding. Not sure where to start. Not immediately important. Staff already drowning in work. We ran into that. Funding. Plan becomes obsolete. Lack of political will, which we've seen.
Yeah.
A number of them say funding is a challenge.
Right. Okay. Funding for the implementation of the plan, certainly, right?
Yes.
Are there any of you, this is where, as Jillian said, we'll provide an opportunity. Use the raise hand feature. Would any of you volunteer maybe to say a little bit more about that plan that wasn't implemented, the why behind it? We would certainly take a volunteer or two that might be willing to tell a little more of the story behind why their plan wasn't implemented or isn't being implemented.
I am going to allow Marilyn Karp to speak.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak. My name is Marilyn Karp. I live in Haymarket, Virginia, in the county of Prince William, okay? We last year, they passed a comprehensive plan that a huge number of citizens, including myself, were vehemently against because they took something that was called the Rural Crescent, okay? A huge amount of agricultural land and said, you can build anything you want on this land. And what they have pushed is to build data centers And that has brought us to the point where we are now trying to defend the Manassas National Battlefield because they want to build 34 or more data centers right on top of the battlefield. Nobody has ever built 34 data centers in one place. And so we are in a war with the supervisors, with the data center industry, with Dominion Power, because everything that is being done is going to destroy our quality of life here in Virginia. I, in particular, represent an interesting little tidbit. I'm 81 years old, and we had the smoke from the fires in Canada. So that was a day I couldn't go outside. But our electric grid here in Prince William County, actually in all of Virginia, is now at such risk from so many data centers that I could find myself without power, okay, on a very hot day. So now I can't stay inside and I can't go outside. Remember,
Okay, Marilyn,
I'm
I'm going to ask you to pause a second. So again, there's a disagreement with the implementation of your plan, but in your case, it appears that your officials are at least attempting to implement their plan. You're just saying there's a disagreement with it. Can we hear, is there
No,
somebody
because
else
it's
out
not-
there that, is there somebody else out there that would like to tell the story about, again, a plan that isn't being implemented and why it isn't?
And again, you can use the raise hand feature to request to be unmuted. Okay, it looks like we have Janine Harrington.
Okay, Janine, thank you for joining us. What's the story behind your plan not being implemented?
So I'm with the town of Oplata in Southern Maryland. And as I noted in the chat that it's political issues. So specifically for the town, our transportation initiatives in the comprehensive plan are not really getting implemented or following through because of the political issues that we have. So we have the town and we have Charles County government and then we have the state. And between the three entities, there's disagreements about how roads should be upgraded, how sidewalks should be built, getting funding to do the different projects. There's also a political issue going on between Charles County government and the town on water and sewer allocations. So it's really mainly just kind of a political issue and trying to get things done because we have so many hands in the pot, and trying to get things implemented is just not moving forward the way it's supposed to.
Okay, that's interesting. A lot of times political issues are about the council of the community that the plan is being done for and differences on that council. And here we have differences in different levels of government all involved in how one element of or one aspect of a plan might be implemented. So possibly one more person that wants to tell a story behind their plan not being implemented. Okay, maybe we'll move along then.
It looks like
Go ahead.
we have Rick Rybeck.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Rick Rybeck in Washington, D.C. And in our comprehensive plan, there were development activity areas around metro rail stations. And there was a proposal to put an apartment building on a few single-family lots across the street from the Tenleytown metro station. And nearby landowners objected and sued in court, said that it shouldn't be developed. And so what we ended up with were 6 townhouses with 2 garages apiece right across the street from the metro rail station, which was a clear waste of that infrastructure. And the people who sued claimed that they were supporting smart growth, that they were environmentalists supporting smart growth. But clearly, this was not in compliance with the plan. And I found that in general, we can say that there should be development next to existing infrastructure, whether it's a transit station or a highway interchange. You can increase the zoning. That doesn't mean the landowners are going to do that. There's a lack of economic imperative for landowners to comply with the plan. And one thing that some jurisdictions have done that would enhance that is to shift their property tax to a split rate tax or land value return tax. What that means is if they reduce the tax rate applied to building values and increase the tax rate applied to publicly created land values, it creates an imperative to develop where land values are high, which is typically next to public infrastructure, and also where the zoning has been increased. Right now, under traditional taxation, if you increase the zoning or density, it's simply a windfall to landowners, encourages them to speculate. They may leave it vacant or leave a surface parking lot, even though we increase the zoning. But if you charge them according to the public land value, then that sort of lights a fire under them, because now they're paying a high tax to keep land vacant, and that doesn't make any sense. So some communities have done this in Pennsylvania. I think there are about 15, including Harrisburg. And it I think makes planning more effective.
Okay, thank you, Rick. So then, really, your input and the input of the first lady that spoke to us indicates that maybe the writers of the plan, the preparers of the plan, didn't do all their due diligence to totally understand what the community wanted, to totally understand what the practical likelihood and feasibility of certain types of projects occurring going forward would be. So these are all things that are obstacles that get encountered in plans being implemented. And we have more of a rhetorical question, and that is, who is responsible for implementation? I guess what Jim and I are saying is that we are. Okay, we might, in an old school way, point the fingers and say, the plan didn't get implemented because the governing body didn't act on it. We gave them a great plan and they didn't act on it. But I think what we're saying again is that there are things that we as the planners, whether we are citizen planners or professional planners, there are things that we can do in terms of our content we address, process we follow, and people we involve that will make a difference in a plan being implemented. Again, we think it's time to think differently. And we're looking at implementation success as having a benchmark. And what we're saying is that the success is measured by results. Is the plan being implemented? Are its principles being followed? Are improvements resulting from it? This is the benchmark that we ought to be measuring the success of our comprehensive plan. We ask the question, does the quality of the document or the ingenuity of its recommendations matter if a plan is not implemented? Again, the thought is every step of the way we need to be thinking about, will what we're doing or who we're involving help us get to a plan that will be implemented? Again, think differently. The comprehensive plan a lot of times is thought of as the end. We did our plan, we pat ourselves on the back. Instead, the plan is a means to an end. Communities find themselves over on the left. They've got problems, they've got needs, there are opportunities facing them if they took the right steps. Citizens might be dissatisfied, restless, concerned about what the future holds. The comprehensive plan is the means to get to the end where our problems are solved, needs being met, opportunities pursued. It's a means of initiating and sustaining motion, progress, and change. In other words, what we're saying is the planning is what matters, not the plan. The planning, engaging the community, generating ideas, devising practical results-oriented solutions for change. That's what matters, not the writing of the book. And there's a famous Eisenhower quote, and I've heard it a couple of different ways, and I'm going to rattle off the way I like it. And that is that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And I think that's what Eisenhower's talking about. Similarly, the old school notion of planning that a lot of us came through. You hire a consultant, they prepare a book, you review the book and submit the book and hope something comes of it. Again, the focus is on the plan. The new school comprehensive plan that we're trying to talk about through the implementable approach is focused on the planning, the work. Meet, talk, inquire, generate ideas, involve people, conduct work sessions, make decisions, design action plans, create implementation teams, and then memorialize this in a plan document. I don't want to say that the plan is an afterthought, the plan document, but certainly the focus is on that being what you do to memorialize what you've accomplished in the planning process. Jim and I both worked with a community in Western Pennsylvania, Jeanette, which is one of the down and out older core communities that's lost population, had some fiscal decline. And Jim was the consulting team and I was the funder at DCED. And these are all things that had gotten started through the planning process of a comprehensive plan. They restarted their planning commission. It had been inactivated a while ago, started their zoning ordinance update. They had already obtained a grant for code enforcement, blight tracking. They were working on guidelines. Because of the negative image they have, they were working with volunteers on a logo and a publicity toolkit. They started to work with a nonprofit in Pennsylvania called the Downtown Center to help create a downtown action plan. The counties came into agreement to provide them support. All of these things happened before any plan chapter was presented and reviewed. That was an aha moment. Again, the focus was on the planning, not on the plan. And our aha remark here is that the convention is that a comprehensive plan, the document, is a guide to decisions to be made and actions to be taken, hopefully, after the plan is completed. And we're saying the implementable plan approach is turning that around a little bit. A comprehensive plan is a record memorializing what we did, memorializing the decisions we made, actions committed to, and even initiated during the planning process. So we've gone through 10 years of our experience at DCED, case study plans and research, and come up with 5 keys for an implementable plan. We're going to go through those with you today. The first key is to focus on real and relevant issues, real relevant community issues. The word issue, what we have in mind is a real problem, need, or an opportunity as the real people in the community might be experiencing it. And another one of our think differently notions is that if you're focusing on a real relevant issue, I think you're really asking questions like, is my community livable, safe, and vibrant and healthy? And as you ask those questions, they cut across the silos of functional elements that we have conventionally based our comprehensive plans around. Why don't we turn it sideways and base our comprehensive plan and put the focus on the question of, is our community livable? Is it safe? Typically, if you've got a problem with congestion in a highway corridor, it's not just a transportation issue. It's a land use issue. It's an issue of the economic development and the infrastructure policy that the municipality has been following. And similarly with that, we say that you actually then organize your plan that way. That's the way that officials and citizens think. When a citizen runs into an elected official in the grocery store, the citizen won't say, I don't care for the housing element in our comprehensive plan. They're more likely to say something like, it's a challenge finding an affordable place for my aging mother or father to live. I'm concerned about the conditions in our neighborhood. Sidewalks are not being maintained. The park is in poor condition. Those are the way that citizens think. That's how the comprehensive plan should be organized, chapters one by one around the issues as people are experiencing and live them. We've got a couple of examples here. There's a couple of municipalities in our neck of the woods. One of them is Dormont Borough near Pittsburgh. And here's the table of contents from Dormont's plan from a number of years ago. And I'm going to zoom in on a couple of them. Again, it's in in the eyes and the voices of the people that spoke out probably at meetings. Is it a transportation chapter? Maybe, but it says we want our streets to be safer. How do we activate our avenues? How do we encourage more transit use? Do smarter parking? Dream Green, great chapter heading. And one of the things they dealt with was actually leadership. Dormont was a poster child for a dysfunctional council at the time. And they actually had a chapter on improving leadership in a comprehensive plan. Another one, New Stanton, a little interchange community mostly. And again, the chapters were on their focus areas, creating a there here, upgrading the built environment, cultivating a critical mass in local attractions. Those are the chapters, again, around the real issues as they were experiencing them, not around functional elements. And here's a project that Jim worked in, and he'll talk about a little bit more, Pine Township in the North Hills of Allegheny County. 4 key issues that we might typically think of. Again, how many functional element chapters? 8, 9. They boiled it down in their eyes to 4 key issues. Now, one of the things I think Jim experienced with this project is it created a little angst for a wary solicitor, because the solicitor said, wait a minute, I'm not sure that this plan is consistent with the MPC. That's our planning enabling legislation, the municipality's planning code in Pennsylvania. So what Jim's team did was came up with basically a translator chart that has the MPC requirements on one side and has how they're actually addressed in the document on the right side.
So I think those of us that have been involved with planning efforts have seen examples of plans as follows. 250 pages of data collection and maps, and maybe 5 pages of recommendations, most of them vague. Or they might have seen plans that had the kind of recommendations that were said, maybe you ought to improve downtown, or you ought to provide more affordable housing. How can a community move forward and implement with those kinds of recommendations? And so we felt one of the elements of an implementable comprehensive plan is the need to provide practical and workable recommendations. And I've got a couple examples here for you. This is again from that Pine, where if you saw quickly the slide before, it talked about appearance and character is a key issue. They wanted to capture the rural character and protect it from a last development and anything going on. And so one of the strategies to deal with character and appearance was to begin restoring the tree cover in the community. And so we talked about that as a way of creating this image, this feeling of a rural space that you drive through woods. Go ahead, Danny. But we didn't stop there and just saying, well, let's reforest the woods. We developed from a very clear step of how you go about doing that, because many of the clients that we have are willing to make differences in their communities, but just don't know where to start. And so we were able to provide 9 steps on how to reforest the community. And we got very detailed, specific steps on how to proceed to do that. And when we adopted the plan, 3 of the steps had already been completed. And finally, in terms of detail, in order for them to get grants, they needed to justify the grant request. And so we developed strategies in terms of mapping areas where it would be beneficial to restore the tree cover, and at the same time then gave them cost estimates for the different types of areas and the different types of tree cover. And it was this that was probably the most helpful element in terms of the Pine Township winning a significant planting grant from the state to go out and plant thousands of trees as part of this project. So this was definitely an implementation project based on clear and workable recommendations. I'd like to just mention one other community up in the northern part of the suburbs of Pittsburgh. They have a route interstate that's a gateway into their community, and they traffic dumps onto your typical ugly commercial retail corridor with lots of large parking lots. It's not with the images that's on the slide. And so they have large parking lots. It's mainly auto oriented. So you see lots of car washes, auto parts stores, car dealerships, used car lots, repair places. It's just ugly. And that's the gateway into this affluent community. And so the other issue is that the community is a classic suburb and it has no sidewalks and no downtown. And so as part of this character and development, they wanted to create something that was walkable and also to enhance the attractiveness of the community and make it more a usable kind of commercial corridor. And so they asked us how that we could do that. And in the traditional model, probably what we would have said was, well, you need to go back and review your ordinances and update your ordinances to provide the kinds of subdivision regulations and zoning ordinances to achieve your goal. But with an implementable comprehensive plan, it's our belief that we need to actually take that step for them. So we did the review of their ordinances and we came up with very specific, as you can imagine, setback requirements, parking requirements, sidewalk requirements, and those kinds of things that would start to build the kind of community and land use that you see in the picture here, as opposed to what they have right now. As an aside, the planning director expressed a frustration with all the phone calls. She says, I don't have enough time because I'm constantly being called about the zoning ordinance for a fence or how to do something for a developer. And we realized that there were an awful lot of common questions. And so one of the things we did was to create after interviewing staff, we created a frequently asked questions list and posted that on their website. That's the kind of implementable kinds of things that we think an implementable comprehensive plan needs to include.
A fourth key is that we believe that a comprehensive plan process ought to recruit partners. It's tough for a municipality, for a community to go it alone in implementing its plan. The thought of recruiting partners and creating capacity to implement the plan would be key to it getting implemented in the end. There are a lot of potential partners, resource agencies and community groups. They bring a lot to a comprehensive plan. They bring expertise, ideas, they bring resources, their staff time, their willingness to be involved, contribute staff time, access to funding. Our suggestion is to involve these kinds of organizations early in the planning process, have them involved in work sessions at the idea generation stage, have them involved in work sessions at the action plan building stage. And eventually, a number of them are going to say they're so interested that they're willing to stay on and make a commitment to help implement the plan, which will be key to seeing something get done.
Before I talk about the Upper Allegheny Valley, I want to say that in the first couple of implementable comprehensive plans, we really tried hard to engage the county in the municipal planning, because ultimately the county was going to provide some support for any kind of implementation. And if they were engaged in the planning, as Denny was with the Westmoreland County on the Jeanette project, now you're starting to have the players who are going to have a say in the implementation being part of the conclusions and results of your plan. And I think it's terribly important from a partner's perspective to make sure you engage in all the levels and that they're all part of the planning process, not just presented the final plan. So this one is a couple communities. It was a 3-community group in Upper Allegheny Valley. Very poor old steel town communities for 2 of the 3 communities. The 3rd community, kind of a bedroom suburban community that was more affluent. And we needed to do some redevelopment in the community. And I don't know how to say this politically correct, but the affluent community had nothing had no interest in being involved in the implementation of the plan. And so we had this void. They had the financial wherewithal, the staff, but they had no political will to engage in the results of this planning effort. And we needed to do some redevelopment in the downtown area. And along came a faith-based group, who had started a very modest effort to provide free clothing to residents of the community in the basement of their church. And it had become so successful that they were starting to look for other things to do to improve the community. And they realized that when they were giving away the clothes, that they were finding that their clients had no way of washing the clothes because they didn't have a car and they didn't know how to go somewhere and they didn't have that. And so they decided to buy a dilapidated old building in downtown, a key property in downtown Tarentum, and redevelop that for a mix of uses. A laundromat was one, a coffee shop was another. The coffee shop could train people on how to run a business. And there would be classrooms for other kinds of training for people, as well as open space just to gather and talk. And they were able to start to change the appearance of the downtown with their redevelopment. So they became engaged in our planning process, and we worked with them as part of the implementation. And now they have become the de facto redevelopment authority for that area and have been able to be very successful at getting some grants by using and supporting the implementable plan. When we were working in a multi-municipal plan for Ingram and Crafton, very low capacity groups. I think they had a staff of one, maybe a staff of two. And they came back to us and said, this is really great. This is exactly what we want to do. These recommendations are on target. That will solve some problems we have, but we're overwhelmed still by what we're having to do because we're working 50 or 60 hours a day without 50 or 60 hours a week and without having to really try to figure out how to proceed. So they asked us to come back with a checklist of what we should do in the next 6 months, because then they could ask volunteers at council, volunteers at the planning commission to start to take on some of these responsibilities. And so we identified very specifically what should happen the next 6 months. And I thought that was a pretty neat idea. I didn't think of it. Our clients thought of it as a way to carry the energy and enthusiasm of the comprehensive planning process on past adoption. And I think that's terribly important for implementation. And so we now have integrated this 6-month or 12-month checklist in every comprehensive plan we do, and our clients are very appreciative of that. One of the things, and some of you mentioned it in your list when you talked about the lack of political will, is this idea of getting community ownership and commitment. I don't know how many of you have worked on a really good plan only to find the elected officials at the end to say, thank you very much, great plan, and then to ignore what you've done for a year or two. It's incredibly frustrating, and I have seen that. And so part of this implementable planning process is to figure out how to do a workaround to the potential for either disinterested elected officials or elected officials have their own agenda, or just a changeover of elected officials as part of that planning process that happens often. And so one of the things that we believe an implementable planning process needs to rely on heavily is really a robust public engagement process. And the point of doing this public engagement process in a really engaged way and really listen, the planner has to leave their ego at the door and come in and really listen to what the community has to say about these things. By doing that and showing the community that you in fact are listening and using their ideas, we start to build a desire on the part of the community. We've seen in some plans, the desire of their community to make sure this plan gets implemented because it's their ideas. And it's their ideas that they want to have implemented. And so what we end up doing is, I kind of call it cheerleaders. We're trying to get cheerleaders to go to the elected officials and say, we really, really want this to happen. Where's the accountability? Who's doing what to do this? I know my friend Alan Feinberg has talked about citizen planners, and I think that's a wonderful term for getting people to be engaged in the planning process. We think another way to make sure that things happen is to make sure there are feedback loops. It's tough when in the old days we would, those planners that really didn't like public meetings because they just weren't very good meetings, would do 2 public meetings, one at the beginning, one at the end, and they figured they were done with public process. And I think what we're trying to say is that a truly engaged process will have these feedback loops, because sometimes you think you hear it right, and then there's a clarification, you refine it, you go back and hear it again, and you make sure that the community has been heard, and you make sure that the ideas that we're presenting are truly the right ideas. And I'd like to just thank the National Shred Institute for really popularizing the idea of feedback loops.
I want a quick story to tell. I was working with a municipality in southeastern Pennsylvania, and the professional planners were presenting to the plan steering committee their proposed recommendations for inclusion in the plan. And the reaction for a couple of those recommendations from the steering committee is, "Where'd that come from?"
Yeah.
And there was no feedback loop. The professionals started backpedaling. Well, don't you remember 3 meetings ago where somebody said this? Oh, you mean you turned that half remark into a major recommendation? The feedback loops are important.
Yes. So what we've heard, we go back and we've talked to planners about this process. We've done workshops for planners in terms of how they can do the implementable comprehensive planning process. And we've heard some things about how the public officials aren't engaged. And we need to see the second bullet is the idea of it's important to have an honest discussion of the capacity to do the work. Oftentimes planners would have these grandiose plans, maybe not grandiose, maybe just really ambitious plans, but no one is there to actually implement them because they just don't have the time to do it. And so I think it's really important that we talk about capacity and that we scale the recommendations to the capacity. Now, we ran into an interesting problem because when the county in Pennsylvania, which reviews all the comprehensive plans, they take a look at a series of recommendations for a community of only 200 or 300 people. They're kind of wondering, what have you guys been doing for the last year? Because they're very modest recommendations. But we did scale those recommendations to the size and the capability, in which case they had no paid staff, and that we were relying only on volunteer effort. And so we scaled it down, and I think that's appropriate. So it's the capacity of the community to implement that needs to be looked at very carefully. So I'd like to tell just a story, if you could bear with me for a moment. This was our Zelienople and Harmony was the very first implementable comprehensive plan that Denny and I did. We were out in about 2008. For those of you that remember, 2008 was a recession and money for planning dried up. And so unfortunately, as Denny mentioned early in the process, he had to lay off staff, I had to lay off staff, but we were maybe 3 or 4 or 5 months into this comprehensive plan process for Zelienople and Harmony. And so Denny and I had to step in as individuals to actively be involved in the planning for these 2 communities. So Denny said, "Jim, let's get together and talk about this." And I know he's been talking to planners for the last year about this new idea of implementable planning. I just wanted to kind of get the project done. But so we sat down and we had a chat about it. And I don't know if you know this, but Denny is incredibly persuasive. And by the time we were done with the meeting, I was ready to go back and say, let's start over. Let's start over. Let's do this plan in a very different way, in a very non-traditional way. Let's focus on process, not the preparation of a book. Now, by now, I'd already had probably 100 pages of a book prepared with census data and all the data collection stuff. And I said, maybe we don't need that. We might need it, but maybe we don't. And so we then went through the process of working through, to me, an amazing process. It took exactly 12 months from the time we started to the time we were done. We had a phenomenal celebration in a historic theater where both planning commissions sat up on the stage and recommended adoption of the plan in front of a crowd. And then someone brought alcohol, which I'm not sure I still understand, but it was a very festive occasion, I can tell you. And so Denny and I were invited a year or two later to present these ideas at the APA conference in Chicago, the national conference. So they didn't do us any favor at APA. They slated us for 7:30 in the morning on the last day of the conference. 7:30 in the morning. Now, I don't know if any of you have been to an APA conference, but you planners, you really like to enjoy the conferences. And I couldn't imagine anybody waking up and showing up on the last day at 7:30 in the morning to hear about our implementable comprehensive plan. We had 100 people show up. It was unbelievable. 100 people who felt that there needed to be a better way of doing comprehensive planning. So in preparation for that meeting, I called the manager of Zeeland Opal and I said, I'm afraid to ask this question, but have you implemented anything that we recommended in the comprehensive plan? I thought we'd done a pretty good job of a process, but I had been disconnected and I really needed to check back in and see what's going to happen. And he proceeded to give me these 10 action items that they have done. It's a small communities. They were snow plowing and leaf collecting in odd arrangements because the municipal boundaries were weird. So they now don't worry about the municipal boundaries when they do it. They do it by the way, a most efficient way of doing it. And the last one I really love is that these were two neighboring villages whose councils didn't like each other and hadn't liked each other for generations, as far as I could tell. And one of the ideas in terms of making sure this plan was implemented was to ask the councils quarterly to sit down and talk about how they were going with implementing the comprehensive plan. And so, sure enough, on a regular basis on Saturdays, the elected officials have breakfast to talk about common issues. And this goes to the point of detail. We prepared the agenda for that first meeting at that restaurant because we wanted to give them a sense of what it is they needed to do to make sure there's accountability for implementation. Go ahead, Denny.
I'm going to skate through these because we're short on time. The people have challenged that the implementable plan isn't a true comprehensive plan, and really we believe it is. It covers all elements. It's not just about projects. Vision, goals, policies are critical to it. It can be long range and short range. Ultimately, things need to be practically viewed in terms of how you act to carry them out, which makes a little more emphasis on short range, but can be long range too. And we just have a quick note. We didn't get it on our book, but we've been asking the question, does a comprehensive plan need to be a traditional paper or printable document? Those of you that are in Pennsylvania, Dauphin counties are one example of a place in which the plan is principally presented by the web. There's a couple of examples of pages. Nationally, I've got a couple of notes from a couple of years ago. A plan called Direction 2030, Your Voice, Your Choice. Kenton County, Kentucky, outside of Cincinnati, had a plan that was principally presented by web. And Connect Our Future, the Charlotte metro area, 14 counties, also principally presented by web. So there are some growing examples out there.
So I'll just mention, so this is a list in a community that we were concerned about the capacity to implement. It's a fairly affluent community, and they have a retreat once a year in the spring for elected officials and staff. And one of the things we were able to get, and was a recommendation of the plan, was that at that retreat, they discussed what was implemented the year before in terms of the comprehensive plan strategies. And this is the checklist from the first retreat after adoption of the plan. And as you can see, of the 13 tasks, almost half of them have already been accomplished as they're going through. But what I really love about it is the expectation that staff and elected officials are going to be continuing year after year to implement the comprehensive plan. And this is Denny's favorite project story. This is a first ring suburban community out of Pittsburgh. We started this planning process. And as planners, we're thinking, oh, this is going to be exciting. We're going to think about active transportation. We're going to talk about redevelopment of old school sites. We're going to do things about all kinds of interesting greenways and preservation. One of the biggest things, not the only thing, but one of the biggest issues that this community told us in meeting after meeting was that there was no safe and comfortable way to wait for the bus at this intersection. And across the street on the left is a park and ride provided by the church. And if you look through the bus stop, you'll see a headstone. This is actually a cemetery the church has. And so the question was, is this an issue? And it was clearly, by all efforts that we got in terms of public process, a concern of everyone. And so we went out and we talked to Lamar Advertising, because they oftentimes funded bus stops. We talked to the state legislature, who eventually gave us some funding for this. We talked to the church, and we went to their building committee and asked them if it was okay and make sure they were not uncomfortable with the development of this. We talked to the borough because they had to maintain some aspects of this, and they were concerned about that. We put all the people together and were able to build this shelter for the transit people who were taking and riding from here, riding downtown to Pittsburgh. And so we need to park our ego at the door when we plan for communities.
Yeah, it's an incredible story from A to Z in a very small capsule, what the implementable plan is about.
So if any of what we talked about today piques your interest, I would encourage you to go online and order the book. Again, I just need to repeat that the costs for the printing are paid for, but then every penny beyond that is donated to the APA Pennsylvania chapter, and it goes specifically to their scholarships and training fund. And we've been writing checks. I think every 6 months we write a check to them to give them that donation. And so I think it's for a really, really good cause.
All right, Scott and Jillian, we're open to take questions.
Great, great. Thanks, thanks, Denny and Jim, for the excellent presentation and very, very timely. First, I want to acknowledge, not only the material that you've presented to get out to people, but the chat has been really active, and I love how people have connected with each other through the chat. So not only are they getting the information from you, but they're connecting with other planners to get and exchange information. So, not only facilitating the exchange of information from you to the participants, but they're exchanging information themselves, which I think is great. Okay, I'm going to go to the Q&A box. So if anyone has any questions, place them in the Q&A box. And right now we've got 2 questions. And the first question comes from Jerome Gonzalez, I believe from Washington, D.C. And he asks, what should come first, the zoning ordinance and its legal requirements, or the comprehensive plan? Jim, you got a smile on your face. Do you want to take that one first?
Well, as a planner who thinks at 30,000 feet and then works his way down, I would prefer to do the comprehensive plan first, so that you capture the vision and the key issues in the community that need to be addressed by the ordinances. But he's exactly right. The comprehensive plan, at least in Pennsylvania, has no legal standing, but needs to be consistent with the zoning ordinances. So then you would very much want to then go and redo the zoning ordinances so they are consistent with the comprehensive plan. But at least from my perspective, I don't know about you, Denny, but I feel pretty strongly that the comprehensive plan comes first.
Yeah, my thought on that is the zoning ordinance rules for rules' sake? If it is, then have at it without a comprehensive plan. If you want your zoning ordinance to be meaningful and accomplishing community objectives and adding, elements of value to your community, then you first determine what those objectives are and what that desired value is via a comprehensive plan.
All right, great answers. Thank you. Next, we have a question from Lee DeForth, who I believe is from South Carolina, just outside of the Mid-Atlantic region. So she says, I'm curious as to how the speakers feel about prescriptive state legislation requiring specific plan document items. For example, South Carolina has 10 required elements, and we found that though we wish to format our plan and process in a more holistic manner, to meet the letter of the law, it was difficult to let the process drive the plan. What changes at the state level or in approach of local planners, if any, would they recommend here? And Jim, I think you touched on that a little bit, or Denny, you had a cross-reference you know, if the headings didn't exactly match up. But why don't you go ahead and, I don't know who wants to take a first crack at this. Denny, why don't you go first?
Denny, yeah.
Okay. In our book, and this is for Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania's legislation is probably not dissimilar from other states. We actually had a legal opinion written by a prominent both planner and land use attorney, Susan Smith, whose commentary was that, yeah, the statute says that a comprehensive plan is supposed to have elements called transportation plan, land use plan, housing plan, but that's basically content. That's the content matter that a plan should address. And it doesn't necessarily say that they have to be chapters. Now, maybe South Carolina's statute does use the word chapter. But again, I think that there might be room, depending on how the statute is worded, consistent with the opinion of the attorney. And there's an opinion Susan wrote that we put into our book Off the Shelf. If the legislation is that specific that it says a chapter has to be called housing plan, boy, I'd get them to change that. I don't know how easy that's, you know, I know legislation's not easy to change, but that's pretty tough. That's pretty strict.
And I just go back to the whole idea that those templates tend to create silos of information. And what we're trying to do is integrate, and I love your term, holistic approach to that. And just this week, we decided not to go after a plan in New York State because of the requirements of the New York State for comprehensive plans, and the fact that we didn't feel that we could meet both their requirements and the implementable comprehensive planning process. So it is a challenge, and I really appreciate that comment.
I guess the other thing I might say is go ahead and do one. Take them on. Let's see how the courts might sell it out. Take it on. If you're skittish, maybe your solicitor is just skittish. And again, the tool that Jim used to translate the legislation to where things are found to show that all the information is there, do that and, you know, take your chances, get challenged. Somebody going to challenge you, take you to court. Let the court help decide that. It's not a good answer, really.
No, I do say that
sorry.
When we have our plans, we have maybe 4 or 5 chapters of key issues. We have an introduction to explain how the process is going. Then we have what we've decided to call other issues, a chapter called other issues. And generally those are issues that are very, very bit as important in the community, but aren't as a highest priority. And we believe an implementable plan really forces the community to focus on a few key issues to work on. And that if they get 12 or 15 or 20 issues to work on it, they'll just be stymied and not work on any. And so, but there are key issues that shouldn't be lost, especially for grants. And this is also the chapter where we put in things, we go back and check the checklist from the MPC. And if there's something that isn't in fact covered, then we develop some ideas about why it wasn't uncovered or what the issues are related to that in this others chapter in order to be able to then build that matrix that you saw.
Okay, great. Thank you for those answers. And we'll see if they're interested in taking it to the courts there down in South Carolina. Have to have a follow-up on that one.
Yeah.
All right, we had 2 questions that are similar on public involvement. From Martina Hatley, how can you get more community engagement? Is it advertising or more public meetings? And then Jared Anderson asks, what have been some of the better and maybe more unique methods of getting meaningful public participation during the comprehensive plan process? So I think those kind of go hand in hand. So Jim, do you want to start this time?
Yeah, I wish I could give you the magic bullet, but I've run into that apathy, and maybe not even so much apathy as people are busy. They're carting their kids to soccer and to dance and everything, and they're just really busy, and it's hard for them to also take time to engage in a planning process. I think what we're finding is that we're relying less on large community-wide meetings and more on reaching out to groups and individuals to kind of collect some of the data. We, of course, want public meetings, and we turn those into festivals. We don't have a public meeting where Jim stands up there and talks for an hour. I would kill the room if you asked me to talk for an hour. But we can have a festival where we bring in ice cream and party and a kids table for crayons and stuff. And we then have tables that are steering committee staffs with various ideas, and they engage one-on-one, one-on-two, one-on-three. That's very helpful. But we're finding now that we'd rather go more focus group in terms of key issues. Once you start an idea, we reach out to all the people that might be interested in that idea, whether it's active transportation or redevelopment or housing. And we work on those, and we try to reach out, and we get a richer response to it than a general community meeting. As you know, well, maybe it doesn't happen in their other states. Unfortunately, in Pennsylvania, in community meeting, there's at least half a dozen that come to complain. And I'm hopeful no one ever happens in any of the other states, but that could be a real distraction to what we're trying to do at the evening's meeting.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is that with the new virtual capabilities, that's really added a new dimension. And some of the research that I've done on other plans around the country, there's a lot more of them that are getting a lot of community input by getting people to participate virtually. That said, though, we recently did planning community engagement for a couple of small communities that are part clients of mine in Western PA. And our virtual meetings were duds. I know, like Jim said, is there a magic bullet? I think a little bit's reading tea leaves, a bit of it's, trying to do different things to reach out to different elements of your community. I think maybe small group engagements, where Jim was talking about, are effective too. We've gotten a lot of mileage out of smaller group engagements of people that are particularly interested in certain subjects, want to contribute. They'll have ideas. They are willing to even do things afterwards.
We did have beer and pizza for one public meeting, and that was pretty successful. But also, here's an interesting that I didn't think of. We were working in a community in the Mon Valley, and there was some high rises of subsidized housing. And one of the high rises had a large contingent of people of Russian background, Russian ethnicity. And so we converted our questionnaire into Russian and hand delivered the Russian questionnaire to them. I thought that was pretty cool to try and reach out to community in that way.
Yeah, and I think food always helps. We had worked on a project a number of years ago in Bethlehem, and there was a large Latino population there. And we did one of our public meetings at, I want to say it was the Puerto Rican Heritage Society, club in South Bethlehem. So, that got people out, and they had plenty of food. And I think that's always something that can help bring people out. Okay, another question from an anonymous attendee. Have you found that drafting of a significant comprehensive plan update is best led by the Planning Commission or having a steering committee? So weigh the options there. Any thoughts on that?
I'll start with it. My answer is that the Planning Commission is there for a reason. We've developed too much of a culture of letting our Planning Commission be plan reviewers instead of planners. And I think we would like to change that and see the Planning Commission go back to being more the Community Planning Commission. And if that's the case, if they're truly the leaders from a citizen standpoint of the planning of their community, then they ought to be in the lead on a comprehensive plan update. That said, though, planning commissions in Pennsylvania, they're limited to 9 people on a municipal planning commission. And you might want more participation in your comprehensive plan update. So some of our municipalities have kind of like done a short-term expansion of their planning commission by having the planning commission and additional people be members of a steering committee that participates a lot in the planning. And then the planning commission at the end, having been involved a lot, can still presume the leadership role of, proposing the plan to council or the governing body and shepherding implementation afterwards.
so I'd like to give a minority opinion. I think that the steering committee needs to be more than just the planning commission. And I think the planning commission absolutely has to be involved. I think at least 2 elected officials have to be involved. I think people from all aspects of the community, from watershed associations to trail groups to everybody else who has a say and a concern about their community, needs to have a representative on that steering committee in order to make sure that all views are perception. And also going backwards, those people then disseminate the information that's going on in the plan. I do have a concern because I've been forced with steering committees of 25 or 30 people. And I got to tell you, it doesn't work. It becomes lectures as opposed to facilitated discussion. And so I would encourage that if you do have steering committee meetings, that you try to cap them at 12 to 15 people and not get much larger, because then you don't have discussion because everyone can't be heard. And so the quiet people stay quiet. The people who like to talk, and you don't really get the benefit and the knowledge and the interest of all the people in the steering committee.
Okay, and I think we've got time for one more question, and then I think we're going to have to start to wrap up as we get down to the bottom of the hour. Another anonymous question: how can we get younger generations involved in the planning process, both on the community input side as well as the planning side? Great question.
Yeah, it's tough to ask someone who's 71. But I suspect the answer is going to be, and I'm not telling you the answer, but I suspect the answer is in the social media way of getting people engaged, and in going to areas, if it's a focus group or an interest group, in areas where young people like to be, and to ask and engage them that way. But that's a really good question, and I see that generally speaking, it's the older population that tends to be the best represented in our discussions.
Jim, haven't you though had success in a couple communities where your public engagement revolves a lot around community events, because the whole family comes to the community event, that as long as you have an activity that the adult or the child or the teenager can participate in, that you get input that way too, don't you?
That's a great way. We go to every community day in Western Pennsylvania, and we always have an activity. It doesn't even have to be around planning, but something to engage people so they come in and stop at your tent or your booth. And oftentimes we'll have candy, as well as sometimes we've even had people from the steering committee donate materials to give and to try and attract people to come in. So yeah, that would be one way where we do meet with families in those events. And we go to many, many events in the community. I think in Mount Lebanon, we've gone to like 12 or 13 public events in the last 6 months. So every time there's some event, we're there talking to people about the comprehensive plan.
Great, good answers. Maybe I'll challenge, if there's some younger planners on the call, we need to come up with some type of planning TikTok, series, and maybe that will get the younger generations involved.
Hey, Scott,
okay.
one more note in terms of public engagement. I think one of the better and lesser known resources on public engagement, it tends to be a little technical, but boy, it's a huge toolbox full of ideas, is the one that EPA puts out. If you just Google public engagement guide, US EPA, I'm sure it'll come up. And again, it's an outstanding compendium, or whatever the word is, of ideas, tools, techniques. Again, it's a little technical, but there's a ton of information there. Yep.
And someone else had put in the chat, again, amazing use of the chat. Everybody has taken advantage of that. Said that there was an Ohio APA webinar on public engagement topic. So that sounds good. Well, let's wrap it up here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jillian for final remarks. On behalf of the Pennsylvania chapter of APA and the Mid-Atlantic Planning Collaboration, We really want to thank our speakers for taking time today to share their experiences and expertise on this topic. I think the exchange of information was great, especially getting everyone involved, getting a lot of people involved through the chat and the questions, and the raising their hands to provide their experiences was great. I believe the presentation will be sent out. A link to the presentation will be sent out sometime shortly in the near future. Don't forget to mark your calendars for January 2024 when the Mid-Atlantic Planning Collaboration kicks off its resiliency series. And thanks again, Denny and Jim. It was an excellent presentation, and I'll turn it over to Jillian.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Scott, for your time, and Denny and Jim. We truly appreciate your participation in the series, and clearly it was thoroughly enjoyed and thoroughly informative for everyone. So I hope, and it seems like there was a lot of great takeaways from today. As mentioned, this recording link and slide deck will be shared with all attendees. So attendees, keep your eyes peeled on your inbox in the next, it should be no more than 2 or 3 days, business days. We'll be sending that out along with other information on the Mid-Atlantic Planning Collaboration and anything else that you might need to stay up to date with APA-wise. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining, and I hope you have a good rest of your afternoon.